Number 1 asks you for the definition of I. So the imaginary number I is the square root of -1. Number 2 asks you to factor completely. And so looking at this expression, we have 4 terms. So where there are 4 terms, I need to do factor by grouping. So the red is the first group, and the orange is the second group. So looking at the red, there's no numbers I can divide both terms by, but I can bring out x to the third power. And so x to the third times another x is x to the fourth. And then x to the third times -2 is going to be x to the third. And then for the second group, we will also have this x minus 2 inside the parentheses. So -8. To get -8, I need to multiply the second parentheses by -8. Now to double check, -8 multiplied with x is -8x, and -8 multiplied with -2 is +16. So everything there checks out. So here we have x cubed minus 8. So that's the first factor, x cubed minus 8. And then the second factor is going to be x minus 2. Now this first factor, we have a difference and we have 2 cubes. And so we can use the formula for cubes. The cube root of x cubed is going to be x. The cube root of 8 is going to be 2. So that means a is equal to x and b is equal to 2. And now using the formula, I'm going to first copy down the positive and negative signs. So for the difference of cubes, this is a minus, this is a plus, and this is a plus. Now a squared will be x times itself, so x times x is x squared. Oh, sorry, this first one is just a. And then b is going to be 2. Now a squared is going to be a times itself, so x times x will be x squared. ab will be x times 2, which is 2x. And b squared will be 2 times itself, 2 times 2, that's 4. And now all I need to do is copy down the second factor here, x minus 2. And that will be the answer. Now notice how there's an even better way to write this, because we have these two factors are exactly the same, so we can write this in an even simpler way. So x minus 2 squared times x squared plus 2x plus 4. Be very careful about number 3. Many of you made this mistake on your last quiz. You see here we have a plus between the two parentheses, so that means you will never multiply these two parentheses with each other. They're simply being added. So now let's look at each parentheses separately. Do you have anything to distribute, like any number being multiplied to the parentheses or a negative sign? No, you don't. So there is nothing that needs to be multiplied. Nothing needs to be distributed. And so all you need to do now is combine like terms. So for the real part, we have 3 and we have 2. So combining that together, that's going to be a positive 5. And now for the imaginary parts, you have negative 5i plus 7i. Combining that together is going to be a positive 2i. And this is all you need to do. You do not need to multiply the two parentheses with each other. For number 4 on the review, the first two parentheses are multiplied to each other because there are no plus or minus sign in between them, so we need to distribute. So let's distribute this. 2x squared times x will be 2x to the third power. 2x squared times -3, well 2 times -3 is going to be -6, and we have x to the second power. Now here, 4 times x is going to be 4x, positive 4x, and then 4 times -3 is going to be negative 12. Now for the third parentheses, we have this negative to distribute. So be careful, we're not multiplying a negative 3, we're simply multiplying a negative. A negative times 2 is negative 2x squared. A negative times a negative is a positive 3x. And finally, a negative times a positive is a negative 7. So notice again, when we are distributing a negative sign, all the signs inside it changes. Then positive 2 becomes negative 2, negative 3 becomes positive 3, and positive 7 becomes a negative 7. I'm pointing that out because this was a common mistake from our last quiz. And now, combining like terms, the highest power we have is x to the third, which is right here and nowhere else. So 2x to the third power. Now let's get the x squares together. We have negative 6 minus 2, which is negative 8x squared. And then getting the x's together, we have positive 4 plus 3, which is positive 7x. And finally, the constants by themselves, negative 12 minus 7, which is negative 19 as the final answer. Now number 5 is very similar to number 4. It just have one more term. So we want to multiply the first two parentheses with each other. So let's distribute the x. So x times 3x squared will be 3x to the third power. X times negative 2x will be negative 2, and we have two x's multiplied together, so x to the second power. And then x times 4 will simply be positive 4x. Now here, 1 times 3x squared will be positive 3x squared. Positive 1 times negative 2 will be negative 2x. And positive 1 times positive 4 will be positive 4. And here to distribute a negative sign, just like what we talked about in the last example for number 4, it's just changing the signs of everything inside. So thus negative times negative is a positive 5x. Negative times a negative is a positive 2x. And then negative times a positive is going to be a negative 3x. Negative 3, no x. So now, just like before, we need to combine like terms. So let's begin with the x to the third power, which we only have one term here. That's a 3. X squared, we have negative 2 plus 3, that's a positive 1, plus 5, that's a positive 6. Now for the x terms, we have 4 minus 2, which is positive 2, plus 2, which is positive 4. And then for the constants, we have positive 4 minus 3, which is positive 1. That's the final answer. For number 6, we have a difference of two squares. We know it's a difference because we see the minus sign. And so let's take the square root of both parts. So square root of x to the fourth will be x to the second. And we know that because x to the second times x to the second is equal to x to the fourth. And the square root of 16, we don't care about the negative 16. We already know it will be the difference of two squares will be 4. So that means the two factors are going to be x plus 4 and x minus 4. But now notice here, the x plus 4, oh sorry, I forgot the squares. The x squared plus 4, even though we have two squares still, that's a plus, so there's nothing I can do with that. But the x squared minus 4, we can continue on. We have another difference of two squares. So let's go ahead and factor this. So square root of x squared is going to be x. Square root of 4 is going to be 2. So this is going to become x plus 2 and x minus 2. And now we can copy down this first factor, which will be x squared plus 4. So it is very important when you do number 6 on your test that if you have a difference, a minus sign, you can factor, but if you have a sum, like if you see a plus sign, you cannot factor. And remember to go all the way. For number 7, we need to simplify this. And so let's break it up. Let's break up the 50. So we can do 5 times 10. The 5 is a prime number, so let's circle that. The 10 is 2 multiplied with 5. And we cannot break up either of them, so let's circle them. And now to double check, 5 times 2 is 10. 10 times 5 is 50. So all the circle ones, all the split ends, multiply together give us 50 back. Now let's look at the second square root. All we have is a 3, and that cannot be broken up any further. So now for the final answer, let's put this together. We have a pair of 5s. So a pair, there are a couple, they can go outside. And then the singles, they go inside. So we have a 2 and a 3. So 2 times 3 is going to be 6. We have 5 on the outside. And because of this negative underneath the square root, we have 5i. And so this is going to be our answer. Number 8 is looking for the complex conjugate. To find the complex conjugate, all you need to do is change the sign of the imaginary part. So you see this imaginary part is a negative 3i. That needs to change to a positive 3i. The real part stays the same. So that 12 stays a 12. 12 plus 3i, letter D. Number 9, we need to factor this completely. So I see we have x to the third power, so let's do cubes. And so for cube, we can factor either sum or difference by just using the formula. So the cube root of 8 is 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 is equal to 8. The cube root of x to the third power is x, because x times x times x is x to the third power. The cube root of 125 is 5, because 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. And so labeling this is A, and this is B. So using our formula for sum of cubes, first thing we want to do is copy down the positive and negative signs. So for sum, this is going to be a plus, this is going to be a minus, and this will be always positive. So A will be 2x. Write that down. B will be 5. A squared will be A times itself, so 2 times 2 is 4. X times x is x squared. AB means A times B, so 2 times 5 is 10. And we have 1x. And B squared is B times itself, so 5 times 5 is 25. And that is our final answer. For number 10, we don't have a number in front of the x squared term, so we don't need to break that up. So all we need to break up is this 20. So what two numbers multiplied together can give us 20? Let's try 4 times 5. And now we're trying to get negative 8. Get the 4 and the 5 to equal to negative 8. So starting with the bigger number, 5 is the bigger number, and because we're trying to get a negative 8, this 5 needs to be negative no matter what. But negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. Negative 5 minus 4 is negative 9. So that means this combination of the 4 and 5 does not work. How else can we break up 20? We can try 2 times 10. So the bigger number needs to be negative because we're trying to get negative 8. Now negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. So that works, and because that works, let's go ahead and multiply the signs. A positive multiplied with a negative is a negative, so that matches. So our answer is going to be x plus 2 and x minus 10.